Welcome to another episode of Chasing Squirrels. On today's episode, we have Chris Rathgab, the CTO and co-founder of Curemint. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome. So I want to dive into Curemint specifically, but before we do that, I kind of want to get a little background on you and your journey to become CTO, because it's pretty rare to have entrepreneurial CTO. And I feel like without knowing who you're talking to, that's how I describe you so far, based on my research that I've had. So can you give us a little background into your first dive into tech, whether it was high school or college, and if that coincided with entrepreneurial type things as well?
Yeah.
Kind of give us some background in that realm.
Yeah. I think for me, my entrepreneurial journey started probably when I was early teens. From a tech perspective, a little earlier than that. I've been messing with code, making my own apps, that sort of stuff since I was about 10, and have always just had a knack for just jumping in there and coding. I've also been very entrepreneurial. Early in my career, it was video games that drove me. Like when I was a kid, I was absolutely addicted to video games. And so much so that after playing them, I started trying to hack them, reverse engineer them, figure out how I can make essentially Game Genie style cheats for any video game. And did that for a while and learned a whole lot about assembly and how to change the runtime behavior of applications and all that sort of stuff, and realized that other people probably want to do this too. And so my first business was selling these game cheats online when I was a teenager. And that was probably the first kind of foray into entrepreneurialism for me.
Did you sell those? Did you have to create a web page, or was there like a forum or marketplace? I can't assume there was a marketplace back then, even though now it's commonplace to sell those assets, right?
Yeah. So we're talking, I started doing this type of thing back in 2002, 2003, and then started selling them probably around 2005. And there wasn't a lot of, I don't know, you got like Shopify's and everything now. None of that is around. And so we did it all through vBulletin, like forums, essentially, that you could like tack on subscription add-ons to and things like that. And so people would come into the vBulletin forum and then subscribe and then charge them monthly type thing.
How'd you get the money when you were not 18 yet? Did you have to like set up a bank account, or was it like PayPal back then?
Yeah, it was mostly just all done through PayPal.
Okay.
And PayPal was a wonderful thing back then.
That's awesome. So you went from video games. I'm only asking this because I've heard this previously in looking through some of your stuff, but somebody did offer you cryptocurrency for some of those assets, right?
Yeah. The whole like selling cheats online thing lasted basically all the way through college, even into kind of when I was doing grad school. So it was like something I did for probably about 7 or 8 years. And around 2011 or 12, people were still like wanting to use some of these cheats that I had. And somebody offered me some Bitcoin for one, but at that time I didn't know what Bitcoin was. I told them that I didn't want their funny money. And I regretted that.
So were you selling cheats and assets for the same game that whole period of time, or was it several different games that you're working through?
It was several different games, mostly online, massive multiplayer type games. So did Warhammer Online, did a lot of EverQuest, Age of Conan. There's a few of the different games that kind of had similar things that people were looking for.
And so did you treat that basically like your part-time job while you're in college?
Oh, absolutely. That was my part-time job, my internship, self-driven internship, if you will. And some of the stuff I created was pretty cool. And like things that are overpowered that probably in retrospect were potentially damaging to the in-game economies a little bit. But ultimately that all ended for some of the more intense cheats that I made. They've patched those bugs, that sort of thing. And so a lot of the stuff I started making was more automation tooling, scripting, things like that allowed people to create robots that run their characters.
Have you worked on any of that recently as like a hobby, or you let that go back then?
No, I haven't. No, there are times where I want to, but
yeah, I'm sure.
I've not jumped into that in, oh my goodness, probably a decade at this point.
Okay. So was there ever a time you were tempted to quit college because it was going pretty well, or were you always wanting to stay in school?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think back. No, I think for me it was always on a track for school. I did shift. I was doing computer science. I jumped over, did computer engineering after taking like a summer or I guess a single semester off. But it was never like I'm going to quit and do this full time. I think where it got really tricky was I kept going to school because they kept paying for it. And
who's they?
Different university or different. At one point, I was working for Oak Ridge National Lab, and they were paying for the school and that sort of thing.
Okay.
I was on track to kind of do a PhD and go all the way with the education, and got all the way up to the point of halfway through writing a dissertation before I got fed up with it and said, I'm ready to go work. And so I stopped at that point and haven't looked back since.
Did you start another company at that point, or did you go work for somebody?
So at that point, whoa, man, that was around 2012. And at the time I was working at Oak Ridge National Lab, I guess it was 2011 or so.
Is that like cybersecurity government?
Yeah. Something or other? I was doing some cybersecurity research, basically the same thing I was doing with video games, where I would take the executables and rip them apart and look at them in assembly and make tweaks and run them in virtual machines, do all kinds of things with them. If you take the same skill set and apply it towards malware and reverse engineering malware and that sort of thing to understand what a malware is doing and how to neutralize it and whatnot, like the exact same skill set translates. And so that's what I got my first job doing, based off of the skills that I acquired doing the video game reverse engineering. And so I was at the Oak Ridge National Lab doing that kind of work at the time. And the iPhone had come out in 2009, and I had bought a Mac and an iPod Touch. And I was like, this is awesome. I want to play with this. I want to learn this. And so I had taught myself how to do it and put out a couple apps on the App Store in kind of 2009, 2010 timeframe, and had some success on the App Store. And that's actually what made me leave to start doing apps full time as a business, to leave the lab. And everybody thought I was crazy because I had this stable, cushy government job and all of that sort of stuff. But the reality is,
just the boring people thought you were crazy.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound crazy to me.
The reality is, and I've always described it as a sickness. I call it entrepreneurial sickness. And it's anytime you're working at a job and you've been there like 2 to 3 years, the sickness starts to set in. And it's like, after about 2 to 3 years, it's just, you can't find any joy in the work, no matter how exciting it is. I'm sitting here reverse engineering malware for the government, and it's like the kind of thing you watch on Jason Bourne movies and crap like that, right? But it's like boring, right? Because the sickness is set in and I want to go do something else. I want to control my own destiny and that sort of thing. And so when I made some apps and they had some success on the App Store in the early days of the App Store, I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I left the lab and started an app business. It was called Zip Studios, and we did it was just me. Did a whole bunch of video games and like utilities and things like that for iOS. And then I branched out and started learning Android on Java and did that for several years and just had a blast doing it, just making stuff for the App Store. And then I would use the success of previous apps on the App Store to slingshot new apps into the top charts and stuff like that by switching to promoting just my apps via banner ads that I've created, my own kind of ads that I could inject in there whenever I wanted. And most of the apps I made were free apps with advertisements. And so whenever I had...
Were they mainly games?
Mainly games, yeah. Okay. Mostly games.
Can you give us, real quick, I want to step back and then I'll ask this next question. But yeah. So biggest thing sickness is the best way to describe it, because a lot of people are like, oh, I wish I had that. And maybe you don't, because it's not like always awesome, right?
No.
So sickness is an accurate way of describing it. Yeah. But jumping from the government job to the app thing, can you give us a brief summary of, were you moonlighting to get there? Was your first app successful? Was it your 10th app that was successful? Because I feel like that's usually where developers get stuck, right?
Man, yeah.
Hey, I'm bored at this job, but I can't leave because I don't have time to build this thing, or I don't know how to do it. So I'm curious of that transition.
Yeah, so that's a great point. Just tell me to slow down if I'm going too fast, right?
No, it's okay.
Because I remember distinctly just the amount of failure it took before I had any amount of success on the App Store. Got the iMac and the iPod Touch, and I was like, oh man, this is the new gold rush, right? Everybody's making apps right now. They're the ones who are making it. And so I just had these like visions of grandeur, right? And it's going to be so easy and I'd be able to walk right into it. It was not. I spent 3 months learning how to create apps back when iOS 2 was out, and how to put them on the App Store with provisioning profiles and all that sort of stuff, when none of the tooling that exists today that makes it easy was available. And there was no React Native or Flutters or anything like that. It was like I had to teach myself Objective-C in order to code apps for the App Store and all of this. And it was hard. And so I did that. And the first app took me 3 or 4 months, and it was like really terrible. But it was like this thing I created, right? Like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing ever because I made it, right? And I put it on the App Store for 99 cents, and I was like, this is it, it's time. And nobody bought it, like, at all. Like,
did you buy it? Did you at least?
Oh yeah.
So you could at least have one sale.
Yeah, I bought it, and I had my parents buy it, and
there you go. You got a couple sales.
I made $3, and a couple months went by, and I think in total, in 2 or 3 months, I sold maybe 10, and half of those were my family. And so I was like, this is really terrible. It was not at all what I thought. I wasted so much time. I'm never doing this again. And like, I went back to like reverse engineering video games, right?
Yep.
And like a couple months went by, and I was like, maybe I just did it wrong. And so I started, maybe I'll just give it another shot. I made another app and spent another 3 months building it, and then putting it up on the App Store to the exact same results. Like nothing. Nobody wanted it. It was terrible. And I was like, okay, at this point, I've literally spent 6 months building apps, another like 3 or 4 months, like trying to get people to download them. Nobody wants my apps. Like, I'm terrible. I'm just clearly a terrible app developer. And it's at that point where I started experimenting and playing with, maybe I shouldn't be charging $1. Like, maybe I should just give them away for free. And so then I put out another app that I didn't charge for. I gave it away for free, and I put a couple ads in it, and I actually had some downloads on it. Okay, this is pretty cool. This is the first one that actually generated a little bit of revenue. It wasn't much, but I was like, all right, so free is the way to go. People don't like paying for things. That was my mistake. So that reinvigorated me, just like getting I made like $50 in a month. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Finally something, right?
Just made it appear.
I remember it was over Christmas break, and I had this idea for a kids game. It was called Balloons Tap and Learn. And it was just this, I had a kid at the time that was really young that was just starting to play around with my iPod, and I made this app that like was like colored balloons, and it would prompt you to tap which ones, and you get stars and things like that. And it was just like really exciting and colorful. And I put it on the App Store, and within the first day, it had over 10,000 downloads. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is like the most downloads I've ever seen, right? Like night one, I wake up the next morning and it's boom, so many downloads. I was like, holy moly, this is great. And on this one, I wanted to get it out quickly. And so I didn't actually take the time to put advertisements in it, right? And so it was just a free app on the App Store. And like the next night rolled around and it was like 25,000 downloads. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's like 35,000 people playing my app right now. This is great. And so after about a week, I had something like 170,000 downloads of this app and people using it. I did an update, put some ads in it, and that was pretty amazing. And it just kept going up, and it winded out. Like the revenue from that, I still get a trickle of revenue from people who like happen to have like an old version on an old IS, even though I haven't been selling the game for like awesome. 5 years at this point. And the revenue with that was significant enough that I was able to leave the lab, and it was pretty easy to just walk away. It was actually more than I was making at the lab. And so it was a no-brainer.
What were some of the games? I'm going to jump forward back to where you were before we went backwards. So what were some of the games that were the most used? Were they mainly educational type of games, or were they all the same format but different assets in it? And then after that, you can go into what you did after the gaming.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I realized that I was having the most success with kind of educational kids games. And so that's where I focused and created focus for. And what I would do is I'd make a game template, if you will, and then like reskin it with different visual assets and sounds, and then launch like 4 versions of the same thing that appeal to different things. Like I remember I had like a memory match at one point. And so there was animal memory match and underwater memory match and color memory match and like all these different types of memory matches. And then I also had like variants of tic-tac-toe. Like I called it moo-tac-toe, and it was like cows and pigs. And there was color tac-toe, and it's the same thing, but like just changing the assets out, making it a little different, right? And so I did that, and like just it hit a bunch of different audiences. Some apps were more successful than others, but mostly it was educational games.
Okay. And then did you end up trying to sell that company, or did the revenue fall off slowly, or did you continue to grow it and hand it off, or how did that one end up?
I remember pretty clearly that this was a great lesson for diversification. Because it was like overnight, it was like an 80% drop in revenue overnight because of policy changes on the App Store. Basically on iOS, we're not going to serve ads in kids games anymore, anything in the kid category, like that sort of thing. And iOS at the time, iAds were paying the absolute most. We're talking like $1 a click in the early days when iOS iAds first came out. It was like $1.05 per click. And so it was like really huge amount of revenue. But then they made a change, and so iAds no longer supported games like that, and you couldn't put them in kids' games for probably obvious reasons. And so you have all these kind of lower paying kind of ad providers and things like that that were in the game, and just the revenue drop was like 80%. And it was like, okay, like this is not great. How can I take these skills that I have and apply them in another way? And that's where I started doing apps for businesses.
Okay.
Mobile apps for businesses back in 2014, 2015, when many businesses didn't have mobile apps, and maybe they didn't need mobile apps, but they thought they needed mobile apps, and I thought they needed mobile apps, but maybe they didn't. And so I created a sort of Wix-style mobile app builder back then called Aptova. And what that allowed people to do was to come in and drag and drop and create their own mobile app, and then I'd publish it to the App Store for them. And this is at a time where if you wanted an app, you had to hire an app developer to do it, and you wanted it in iOS and Android, and you have to pay for each of them, that sort of thing. And I created this kind of templated version of doing it with different feature sets, chat boxes and things like that you can interact with customers or whatnot, and put that out there on a monthly subscription thing. And it was just a lot of work. And I think one of the thing that I learned was that with those kinds of things, like I had a hard time getting people to like want to use it themselves and learn how to build their own app. Like I had this idea that if I built the like environment, they'd come in and build their own app, and all I'd have to do is publish it to the App Store on their behalf. That's not really how it played out. Like most of them liked the idea. They liked that it was cheaper than like hiring an app developer, but they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to like go in there and learn how to use the drag and drop tools or anything like that. So it really turned into a tool that I used to like make apps faster, like templated apps faster for some small businesses, basically. And that was how I shifted out of making games and stuff to making mobile apps for business.
Okay. Was it more almost like an agency? Like they almost wanted you to probably maintain it too, right?
Yeah. And that was the thing that like, it was, I thought it was going to be easy, right? Like I thought it was going to be like, let's build this template builder. They'll build it themselves. They'll maintain it themselves. And I'll just kind of make sure I keep updating the core templates and like making sure that's operational and then like push updates to these apps and stuff. It wasn't that. It was a heck of a lot of do it for me. And then that meant like me constantly being on the phone with like customers, trying to like make sure it meets the needs that they want. And sometimes it's like, all right, I want this custom capability that you maybe isn't in the template. And so now it just became a maintenance nightmare. And the money didn't justify the amount of work that was going into it. And so I did end up winding that down. And that was about the time where I was like, you know what, I should probably get a job because I need to make money.
That those one-off custom features probably served you well at Curemint. So we'll get into that in just a second. So where did you get a job after that? And also, did it mentally kill you inside that you had to get a job as this entrepreneur?
No, actually, it's funny because I say entrepreneurial sickness and it sets in after 2 or 3 years. But my career has been this cycle of get a job, be bored and do it for a couple of years, be bored and like need to build something of my own, go do a startup that has maybe some amount of success, maybe a lot of failure. And then, okay, that was cool. I'm exhausted of that. Let me like retreat back to the safety of real dollars and then and not having to just pour myself into something full time all the time, above and beyond all the time. and then that's the cycle and it would repeat itself.
That's fair. So I can relate to a lot of that. So what's the job that you took next? And then how did that, I think we're probably getting close to Curemint days.
Yeah, we are. So the next job that I had after that was I went to work for this pet product manufacturer called Radio Systems Corporation.
Okay.
They own Invisible Fence brand, Pet Safe, Sport Dog, that sort of thing. And they were at a point where they're a traditional kind of manufacturing company born out of the wireless fence technologies and then branched off and started doing all kinds of other product categories and all that sort of stuff. And one of the product categories they were really popping at the time was IoT and smart connected products and smart connected pet products. What do those look like? And almost all of them have some sort of interface with a mobile app of some sort. And it's, okay, we got to configure this smart connected product. What am I talking about? Like automated pet feeders. I'm talking about the wireless training, remote controlled wireless training devices. These types of things that say you want to set a feeding schedule for your pet. You want to manage that schedule on your phone with an app, and you have a piece of hardware that has like a wireless chip in it and some firmware, and you can send commands over the internet and update the settings of that device so that it can feed your pet, that sort of thing. And I went to Radio Systems to help them kick off their IoT product offering, given all the mobile experience that I had.
So this is pure speculation. I want you to confirm or deny this, but I assume if somebody, I have a very little level of experience building software, but I assume you're like, once you go to the hardware, you're actually more thankful, even though software always breaks and it's hard sometimes. But like hardware seems like there's so many physical constraints that are outside of, there may not actually be a physics answer to this problem right now. Did you find that was true or not so much in your experience? So
to be clear, I wasn't programming the hardware. I was more leading a team that was working cross-functionally to do this type of development and kind of bootstrapping. How do we set up mobile app systems and things like that could work with it? However, your assessment is right. Working on hardware is hard because you're working with limited physical constraints of what you can do based off of what the hardware can do. And oftentimes that's born out of what is the cost you're trying to hit and the components that you have. And you've got like this optimization problem of getting enough hardware that it can do what it needs to, and potentially even more so you can expand on it in future years to come, but not so much hardware that you've priced yourself out of anything that any like consumer would want to buy, that sort of thing. And so it's like finding that balance is can be tricky, right? And then, then you run into like weirdness where, okay, maybe the PCB didn't get laid out correctly. And so you've got interference in some of the lines and like things like that. And there's just a lot more, it's a lot more challenging when you start getting into embedded systems and like hardware land, like so many more things can go wrong than if you stay on the kind of the, I would say like the cushy just software side that we're
Right.
in this world with infinite resources or all the resources are cheap.
And so from there, you went to one more company before Curemint. Is that right?
Yeah. So after a couple of years, I was ready for another change. I was tired of doing that. And so I created a dev shop, and it was more kind of contract development work type thing for others, and made some contacts in the kind of cannabis industries in California and helped create track and trace systems that integrated with kind of regulatory systems. So if you can imagine where cannabis is legal, it's heavily regulated. The government wants to know every seed that goes in the ground, every plant that's cut, how much it weighed, every transformation of the product. All of it's tracked and all of it's reported to the state and has specific reporting requirements and things like that go along with it. And so traceability is very important. And so I was helping some of these companies build kind of custom systems that allowed them to operate their businesses like businesses and very professionally and still maintain like automatic kind of regulatory compliance on the backside, and did that for several years. And I took a model with the dev shop of a few customers, but like really great long-term relationships. And so I had a handful of employees, like 3 or 4, and they were just dedicated to these 3 or 4 just long-term customers that I had.
I only have one question about that business, and it is: did they have to pay you in cash, or were they like? Did they? I feel like they aren't allowed to have relationships with banks, or at least they weren't then.
Yeah.
Did they just walk in with briefcases of cash, or how did that work?
There was a lot of cash involved. Yeah,
That's amazing.
Which is hard.
Yeah, I know. I used to work in a bank. I'm aware of the challenges of that one. How did you get involved with Curemint when you were running the agency? Because I'm assuming just knowing your background, agency work is going to become repetitive at some point for you, right?
That's what happened, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. I did that for several years, and I was getting really tired of building something for someone else. And I wanted to do a product-based startup, something that like a product that I actually owned as opposed to a product someone else owned. And so I really, I wound down the business and made sure that all the customers I had were in a good place, transitioned like the work to other dev teams and whatnot, and then focused on just embedding myself in communities, trying to figure out what was the next thing that I was going to do. Because I wanted to start a business. I wanted to build a product. I wanted to build something that people would want to use and born out of some problem that really existed and that sort of stuff. And I didn't know what it was. And so I was exploring and I was like floating around. I like to say, just creeping in on a bunch of online communities like real estate groups and LinkedIn and Facebook pages. I really thought I was going to do something in real estate. I had some ideas there and was like sitting in and talking with just real estate agents and brokers and all that sort of stuff. And then that's when I met my current co-founder, and he's like, hey, like, you should come work with me. And I was like, okay, dental procurement. That's really exciting. Like,
where'd you meet him at?
American Underground, which is a startup entrepreneurial community here in the Durham Triangle area. Met him through mutual contacts that said, hey, you two should meet. And he was at a point with his product where he had some traction with customers who wanted what he had to offer, which was a way to bring all of the spend that they're making. If you think about a typical dental office, to run their business, they buy from a lot of different suppliers. They need all the gloves and the little like water picks and things like that. Like that stuff comes from somewhere, right? You know, you go to the dentist and you see that stuff there. You probably don't think about what is the origin story of this water pick or anything like that. But the way those dentist offices get it is traditionally they buy from 20 to 30 suppliers to supply their business in 20 or 30 different ways. And the solution that my co-founder had stumbled on through kind of diving into the industry and realizing the problems in the industry was that, let's make an e-commerce platform custom for this dental organization, for their supplies, for their vendors, that is a single experience where they can buy from any of them. And then we'll handle the order placement and all that on the backside with technology. And that's the solution he had put together with a super low cost MVP, like hacked together Drupal website that was just terrible. But it didn't have scale.
Hey, A for effort, right?
Hey, no, he's fantastic. I think he was validating his idea and did it cheaply, which is exactly what you need to do in that early stage, right? And so he was like,
and more importantly, he had dentists as customers versus you were going after real estate agents. It would have been a world of hurt.
Fair enough. And the more I got to know him, the more I got to understand what he was doing, I realized that what he's doing isn't about dental. Dental is just the target market. What he's doing is solving problems for small businesses that really any small business has. And that is procurement. How do we get the things we need in order to successfully run our business? And the challenges he was running into were technology challenges that I could absolutely help him with. And one of the things he said to me, which really stuck with me, and it's true, was, and it's like, you could spend the next 2 years searching and interviewing people and all of that to find where the value lies that you're going to try to deliver, or you can jump right over all of that and jump right in where I've got something here that people are actually paying for right now. Help me scale this. Help me figure out how to bring this to the market in a way that's manageable. And my one thing was, you know what, I am not working on your MVP. That's not happening. And he's like, no, start from scratch. Build it like it needs to be built. And that was it. From there on, it was, let's do this. Let's try it. And I'm glad I did, because it's been a blast for the last 4 years.
And so he already had traction when he was going in there. So then he allowed you to build it from scratch. So yep. Based on what you had learned so far, how did you approach that? Was it just you on the team at that time?
So we had, so at the time he had.
Also, were you guys both, did you move to Raleigh, or were you living in Raleigh or Durham at the time?
I was already here. He had recently moved here.
Okay.
He had built something that he validated some people were willing to pay for, but it didn't have any scale. Basically, every single customer he sold, every office he sold, had to spin up a whole new website to manage it. And with as you can imagine, as he scaled to dozens of these sites that he had sold, he had to manage a dozen different instances of Drupal. And it was literally, you want to update a product offering, you have to log in to 12 to 15 to 20 different websites.
Yeah, he was like running his own agency.
Oh my gosh, It was a mess. And so he had hired some success support to help him manage this manually. And that was the point where I came in. And the first thing I did was I created just a unified database where we can generate output files that we can rehydrate databases with and that sort of thing to make automating management of all the existing customers a lot easier. And then the next thing was, okay, let's get started building like the version that it's going to be. And so over about 3 months, we rolled out our first kind of V1 that was the current platform that we've been building off of for about 3.5 years now.
When the one question I want to ask about this that I feel like is a tough spot for everybody building product, especially that V1, is how do you know how much is too much to build, right? I'm sure you have all these problems and it's, hey, at some point I think we're going to have feature X in there. You don't know. It's like 50-50, right? Because he's probably telling you one thing to the best of his knowledge, but then the customers might go another direction in the future. So like, how do you reconcile that when you're building V1? Because that's a really tough process for people the first time.
I want to call out that it's not just a problem for V1. It's a problem every single startup has, even through their entire journey, right? I think with V1, it was a lot easier because we had, let's get what we did in our MVP at least a parity with V1. And then from there, it's like, what do we build? What does our roadmap look like? And that starts getting into kind of product management philosophy. And like, how do you decide what you're going to work on and why you're working on certain things? And I can tell you the last 3 years has been a humbling education in product development. And I say that because that question, what do we build, is a really hard one. And I can talk you through the journey that we've gone through and the mistakes that we've made and how we've learned from those and are doing better now, I think. That is that the mistakes we made was just listening to everything that our customers wanted. And that sounds like, what? You're listening to your customers? That's your mistake? No, the mistake is listening to everything that they wanted. And it was a thing where we had all these different customers that had kind of all these different custom wants and needs related to the system. And so it was like, this customer wants this customer wants that. And we had some bigger customers that like paid more. And they were like, hey, we're paying a lot for this. We expect to have this, and that sort of stuff. And so what we turned into was just this just sporadic all over the map. Let's go build this feature and that feature and this feature and that feature and this feature and that feature because this customer wanted that and that customer wanted that and this customer wanted that. And it turned out that was terrible for our product because it led to creating so much stuff that we had to support. And it was like, how do you support all this stuff? And how do you do all these things well, right? Like when you're managing and maintaining and trying to expand the feature sets and the capabilities based off of all the different varying wants and needs, like that's not product management at all. That's feature factory development. That's just listening to what they say and going and building like you're a contractor for them. And I think that like product management is so much more than that. It's like being able to take this information in, digest it, and pull out the key insights, the key things that like are common amongst them. And maybe it's not 100% solution for them or 100% solution for them, but it's good enough that like it's a leap forward in experience in what they were thinking about. And if you do that and you aggregate that well from lots of different customers and you find the commonalities and you map it all out and you come out with something that is maybe a feature set that nobody actually asked for, but solves a lot of things way better than they could have imagined. And it's like, if you'd asked them, how do you solve this problem? They would have never given you this answer. But like you've stumbled into this answer through like taking the information in and processing it and like having a whole lot of brainstorming sessions and making connections in other places. And this is a process that we have evolved and quite frankly, we're terrible at early on. And then I would say over the last 2 years, we've gotten better at it. And in the last year, we've gotten a lot better at it. And the thing that is absolutely critical to where we're at right now and how we approach product is focus. We focus on one thing. We have a small dev team. Our dev team is 6 engineers, which means we can't juggle 100 things. We were at a point where each engineer was working on 3 or 4 things at a time, and nobody could do anything. Everybody was stressed out, and it was terrible. And we were doing things badly, right? But we were doing things, and so they would want a feature, and we'd do it, right? But now we're at a point where we're working on one thing, and all of our 6 engineers have been working on that one thing together. And it has been just night and day different, and the developer like life quality as well as our ability to do things well. And it does mean sometimes we have to have hard conversations with customers that says, this thing that you want, we hear you. We know that you want it. We're working on this thing right here that we also know that you want, or that's going to really have an impact on your business. And we're going to take the feedbacks that you have. We're going to bring that in, and like what we come out with is going to help you, and we promise. And like we're at a point where right now we're about to launch a big feature, and I'm really, really excited about what's coming with it.
I want to dive into some of the makeup and culture within your team that you talked about as well. So I know on your job post you talk about people getting assigned to a code buddy or being assigned to like coding pods. So can you take me through what that looks like for your team?
Yeah, I think that onboarding with my team is a thing where when you first come on, you're assigned a code buddy, and the code buddy is just your first point of contact. It's your recess friend, right? It's the person that, when you're in school and it's like your best friend that you go to because you feel safe and comfortable, that sort of thing. You can ask them anything and they're not going to judge you for it, that sort of thing. That's something that we do here. Everybody, regardless of level that comes onto the team, is assigned a buddy. And they special relationship forms between the buddy, and it's oftentimes a mentor / mentee / reverse mentor / mentee relationship. And that's really special. And I think it really eases the onboarding experience. And that's one of the things that I think helps new people coming into the team like really get acclimated.
And one of the things you talk about too is testing. So I know I will routinely ask this in episodes with, oh yeah, we should definitely do testing. We don't at the moment, but we should. You have a pretty serious, it looks like pretty serious stance on testing and making sure people do have automated tests.
Automated tests, yeah. And I've made the joke, you ask an engineer what's their stance on testing, and they'll tell you how great testing is. And you ask them what's their experience with testing, and they'll look at you with a blank stare and say, we should be doing that. That's obviously not all engineers, but there's a lot of them. And then you just got to step back and ask yourself, why are people not doing tests? And I think it's a thing where if you ask any given person, you're going to have lots of different potential responses. And some of them are going to be around timelines, and there wasn't time to do tests or things like that. And I think that one of the things that is like anything that's hard is you just got to start doing it. And the more you do it, the more you practice it, the faster you get doing it. And then it becomes a thing where, okay, you need to build something. Like tests are a part of building it as an engineer, right? Okay, how long is this going to take? You don't estimate how long something's going to take and then X out the tests immediately as the first thing to go. If you want to start doing tests, no, you factor in the fact that you got to do tests and you got to write tests that can help you out later on as a part of building it. I think that it's tricky in startups because early on it's about moving fast, moving rapidly, and how do we move as fast as we can? Because what's the point of writing tests for something that you're going to invalidate as an idea that maybe you're going to throw away because you did this thing and nobody actually wants it, and so we're not going to do that thing, right? So then you just spent a bunch of time writing tests and so on and so forth. And I will say we're not perfect at Curemint. Like there's some things that aren't tested. A lot of stuff is, though. We do write tests, and we teach people how to write tests. I think that's something that if you look at all the tutorial videos and things like that, you see the basics of intro to writing tests, basically. And that's the experience most people have with writing tests. And so one of the things we do is we have a lot of examples of tests. And in our pull requests, when you come onto the team and you're putting some requests up and I don't have tests, we'll teach you how to write tests. But I don't think it's a thing where we require somebody to have had experience writing tests as a part of coming onto the team. We teach that along the way. I just advocate for engineers to write tests because it pays dividends later.
It does. It does. One of the things you put in there too is you want people who want to do more than just write code. So can you tell me what you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think that there is a systemic problem that exists in how most organizations, and I say most pretty confidently, most organizations build software. And it stems from the clash between business and technology and the needs of business and really showing value and growth and things like that, and timelines, deadlines, which are the enemy of engineers and all that sort of stuff. And the desire to do great work and not feel like you're constantly on under the microscope to get something done, or some estimation you're going to provide is constantly being evaluated and taken for the law because they ask for an estimate, but then they challenge you as to why it's taking longer and that sort of thing. And I think that this push and pull has created a need for developer friendly process. And you've seen this emergence of agile software development, which we run agile. And you ask any person who runs agile what that means for them, they're going to say something different, right? But a lot of what has emerged is Scrum based agile with 2-week sprints. And you talk to any software developer, they'll tell you about their experience on a team where they go in, they do their sprint planning at the beginning of their sprint, they get the work that they're going to build, and then they build it, and then they have their retro, they have their daily stand-ups, and it's all kind of the same. And what emerges in those environments is after 2 or 3 years, you get developer burnout and the system starts to fail and everybody's like tracking velocity and it's all like, you're not pushing enough velocity and it's tricky, right? And I think that's born out of creating systems that we can operate in and succeed in and trying to advocate for kind of engineering needs. And one of the problems that I've seen emerge in team after team is that engineers often don't get to see the work that they're working on until sprint planning day. It's like you've got this product team, product owners or whatever that are delivering the work, and it's Monday of the sprint. Here's everything you're working on this sprint. And then make sure you can planning poker commit to getting it done. And like, then it's okay, we're rolling over points or we're sandbagging our estimations to make sure that we hit it and that sort of stuff. And it's just a broken system. And I think the core issue in that broken system is that engineers are not involved early enough in the process. And that's something that I think we've done a little differently that has led to more than just code, right? Because an engineer is more than just a coder. An engineer is a fierce problem solver. They come up with solutions that in an isolation, a product owner or a designer is not going to be able to come up with because they don't know what's possible. And the best product owners and designers might learn what's possible over time and be pretty close, but then you still have this engineer that's out of context, that was not a part of this solution, being handed a thing to build. And what that breeds is resentment between your engineering team and your product team, where the engineers start to feel like code monkeys, or they start to feel like mercenaries and work for hire, basically. And the extreme of that is when entire engineering teams get laid off or whatnot, and then the work gets project outsourced to some other company kind of thing. But what you can't lose sight of, and what is just such an impressive and powerful thing, is when you bring those engineers into the process way earlier, put engineers on customer calls to listen to the problems firsthand, have engineers be a part of the conversation when we're trying to like weed out what is the actual problem here, what are possible solutions, how else might we solve this before you even get into writing epics or stories in the discovery phase of the project. You bring engineers in at that point, and the solutions you produce are so much better, and the engineers themselves feel like they're a part of it. And so that breeds a very healthy engineering culture. And then maybe not all the engineers are in those conversations, but you bring them into the refinement during the discovery period, like working collaboratively while the stories are being created to evaluate how are we going to build this and that sort of stuff, so that by the time it's being worked on in the sprint, they know about what it is. They know exactly what it is. They were a part of coming up with what it is. And the end result is they're much more likely to succeed in building it. And this is how we operate. This is how we work. This is what we've learned over the last 4 years of doing product development. And like doing this with focus has allowed us to bring more than just coding from an engineer. And I think it's so much more rewarding of an existence as an engineer. And you are going to have engineers who just want to come in and be told exactly what to do and be told, like, here's my list of things that I got to do. And they don't really want to interact with people. They want to go build their thing and do it. Those aren't the engineers for Curemint. We want people who want to engage. They want to be collaborative. They want to be a part of the team and engaged in the early processes, which means how much are they writing code? I don't know, writing code 60, 70% of the time. Doing documentation, being a part of these other things, other conversations, 30, 40% of the time. It's a lot more than just writing code here, man.
I think it's pretty similar to the writing test thing, right? Where it has the appearance of it takes longer to do that and the upside's not that high, but you're wrong on both counts, right? Yeah. Like in the sense that, because everybody wins in the scenario when devs are sitting with customers or maybe sitting with product people and helping solve some of those problems, because the customer ultimately is who wins, right? Yeah. But then I almost feel like the side effect is the devs and the product team. Like you have a more cohesive team at that point too, to the point where the ancillary benefits are like now those people are meeting without you even being there, right? To like continue to make things better without you having to do any effort as the leader of the organization. So I've definitely seen a lot of ancillary benefits when it's been approached that way firsthand also. Okay, so that said, when you're screening for these types of engineers, what does your interview process look like when you bring engineers onto your team?
Yeah. So it's actually pretty small in the process overall. I think I typically set up a screening call with a non-engineer. We have Heather at our organization is fantastic. I've often go to her as a first person to talk with a new candidate. And what they're looking for is, could this person live and exist in the Curemint organization and thrive in the Curemint organization, just how we work and kind of what we stand for and that sort of stuff. And also just a very high level technical filter. Just, do they seem like they are capable of carrying on a technical conversation, or that it kind of tries to weed out the initial conversation there. Then it's with me usually. Let's have a talk. And that's typically pretty technical talk. I dive in. I usually latch on to, we'll have a general topic and I'll latch on to something that they say and say, oh, tell me more about that. And then ask technical questions about how they overcame certain solutions or problems that typically come into play and those types of things. And so, that is with me. And then after that, if everything goes well there, we have a team technical, which is a hour-and-a-half long interview with 3 of our engineers. First 45 minutes is just an interview. The second 45 minutes is a code review, presentation by the person who we're interviewing. And so in lieu of a live coding exercise, we do a live code review exercise. And we ask an engineer to bring code that preferably they have written and review that code and talk us through their thought process, how they came up with the solution, why they did it this way, that sort of stuff. And we found that that's usually a lot less nerve-wracking than putting someone on the spot with some obscure leak coding problem.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely more comfortable when it feels more two-way, and a review would feel a lot more two-way than a code test in front of somebody else.
Yeah.
So how long does that process typically take, would you say?
It depends on time of year and other holidays and things like that, and who's in, who's out. But I would say a week, 2 weeks.
Okay.
A week and 2 weeks.
Anything under a month is fast. I'll kind of set that as a bar. But yeah, so as people want to, they'll hear this soon, but also probably in several months, where's the best place for them to apply or check out any openings that you guys have? Do you have a
go to our website?
Page?
Yeah, go to our website, go to Curemint.io, and at the bottom there's a link to our kind of careers page, and it'll show what positions we have open.
What do you have open currently right now?
We have one senior software engineer, full stack. I'm looking for somebody at the moment. It is January 11th, 2023. Looking for somebody at the moment who's a little bit stronger on the front end. Our tech stack is a React front end. We have a GraphQL API that we communicate with to a Laravell PHP backend. Kind of all run in AWS services. We've got some Node.js microservices that we work with. But looking for somebody who is full stack that can work in that tech stack and also that has a little bit stronger React experience.
Perfect. Everybody I know that uses Laravel always tells me they're not going to use anything else ever if they can help it. They feel very strongly. In general, devs have really strong opinions, but Laravel people are even higher than what I would consider strong opinions.
I understand why.
Last question. Do you have junior engineers on your team? And then how do you approach as people are going to look for jobs, they'll see some job posts, mainly large companies, they'll say must have computer science degree, right? So how do you view computer science degree versus individual hackers that have no education versus maybe not a hacker but went to a boot camp type of situation, or they all the same to you based on just their output? I'm curious how you think about that.
It's a great question. I don't personally think that a CS degree is necessary. So let me actually back up and say, do we have juniors on our team? The answer to that question is no. We don't have juniors on our team right now, but that's only because we hired juniors and mentored them up, and now they're mid-levels and senior engineers, and they've been doing it with us for several years. And so we've grown our team, and we have a core team that's been with the company for a while. And we have had juniors that have started at Curemint and have excelled and grown out of that role and into something more. And so Curemint does hire juniors. We're just at the moment, we're not, and we will at some point in the future. What I look for is a good ratio and a good balance of how much can we support someone growing up and bringing them along. And if you do that too much, you throw your team off balance and it slows you down in ways that you don't necessarily want. And so absolutely, we will have junior positions open in the future. We'll have mid-level positions open in the future, and we'll have seniors open in the future. And we do hire juniors. I would say more than half of the people that currently make up my team went to a boot camp instead of a traditional CS degree and have done very well. I don't think the degree is necessary. I do think that learning like computer science and the things that go along with it is important, but it doesn't have to happen at the beginning. I think it comes from the natural curiosity of understanding why is this data structure in this way, and how can I speed this up? This is a really slow performant thing, and what are state machines, and like all these things start leading into like language modeling and all these other things. Like you can't if you are like truly always asking that question why, or exploring how to grow, you can't do coding without butting up against CS at some point. And it's like those who bump into it and are like, no, thank you. I think those are the ones that are probably going to struggle a little bit when it comes to finding a job, because that curiosity isn't driving them into that discomfort area to learn more and understand the foundations of this and where it came from and why. And I do think that enriches and does add something to a developer, but it doesn't have to come through a traditional 4-year university or anything like that. That can be acquired just through reading and other people on the internet and finding good resources and buying the same textbooks that the universities are teaching this stuff out of and throwing yourself into it to learn if you're naturally curious for that sort of thing.
And actually, I have one more question, circling back to the job, actually.
Yeah.
So for real, last question is, one thing I noticed too on your job thing, I'd leave you with this promise. You'll grow as an engineer faster than you've ever grown and learn more than you ever thought was possible on this team, and you'll have fun doing it. Can you elaborate on why you make that promise?
Yeah. That promise came from the fact that inevitably, after hiring juniors and others that have been a part of this team and just working with this team, and then they go and they like talk to their friends that are at code schools and they're just light years ahead of them. Like, even if those people have other jobs at other companies, like just kept hearing it over and over again. I cannot believe how fast I have grown. I cannot believe like all the things I didn't know when I started and like that I know now. Like it's just a constant thing that I kept hearing. And so I was like, yeah, that's probably born out of kind of what we're doing here. And so I feel pretty confident in making that promise that you come here, you're going to learn a lot and you're going to learn fast, and you're going to say, you're coming out of code school and you got other people came out of code school with in your cohort, and they took a job somewhere and you took a job here, and you like compare yourself to them a year later, you're going to be further along than they are. That I feel pretty confident about. And as for the detail on the job description and what success looks like, that's born out of just me being a bad manager in the past. Like, I have learned a lot about managing people over the years, and I was not always good at it. I'm still like learning and honing my skills on this front. But one of the things that I have learned is that, and this has been my experience as well in the past, being on the other side of it, is that like one of the biggest points of frustration in a job is when you don't know what success looks like. There's no clear, am I succeeding? Am I doing good? Am like, what's expected of me here? And everything is acquired through on the job, like learnings, and you get a feel for how you're doing, but then you're never really sure, and you're always afraid that out of the blue they're going to just decide one day to let you go and that sort of thing, and that's terrifying and whatnot. And so one of the things that I have been trying to improve on is really documenting what does it take to succeed. what does success look like? What is expected of me? And I think that as you, like, each person, I think that answer to that's a little different depending on hats that they wear within your organization and where they're at from a skill set perspective and things like that. And some people have more responsibility than others, and like some of those things. And so, like, when you acquire more responsibility, is that defined what that responsibility is, what's expected of you from it, like that sort of thing? And so I've published on GitHub, for the Curemint GitHub, like for expectations of a senior engineer, what I think it means to be a professional engineer in this field, the kinds of things that you need to be like striving to do and hold yourself like the bar to hold yourself to. But I think that, like, beyond that, when you get into a position, that level of clarity only helps you grow. And I think maybe you're right. That's probably why, like, people in this role grow faster than they have before. And I think that the two are tied together. But I can tell you that 5 years ago, I didn't have anything like that, anything documented like that. And I'm sure that it resulted in frustrated engineers that were working for me. And I've just trying to do better at being clear about what does success look like.
We'll throw the careers page and also that GitHub link down in the show notes if anybody wants to check those out. So I think that is all I have. So thanks for coming on today, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.